Well, Angela.
No, I'm listening to your music.
All right, folks, so we'll make a start. So welcome to the Real seminar series for the year. So we're going to have our very own Carol kick off proceedings for the year. But so just before we get started, so just a couple of COVID-related updates that we have to make. So those of you who are watching from your office or from home, so thank you for joining in. Just for your information, the people in the room, and if anyone comes in late, we'll let them know. We're all making sure that we've got at least one chair space between us. And then hopefully you've checked in either when you were in Yellow 2 before or on your way into this building here. I think that's it. So yeah, so it's going to be an interesting year of seminars. I think we'll find that it's going to be pretty real dominated, or at least people in Darwin dominated with the restriction in travel. But I think that's a good thing because we get to have a look at what we're doing here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to refer to my notes because Carol's got a very storied and interesting career, and so I can't keep all of this in my brain at once. But so Carol's got over 25 years of experience working in conservation, including 16 years with the NT government, and then more recently 2 or so years working here at Real. So she's got a list of, sorry, you sent it, so I have to read them out. A pretty impressive list of achievements. So initiating the first research and monitoring of 4 coastal dolphins here in the NT in 2007. Designing mark and capture projects across Australia for 3 species of coastal dolphins between 2011 and 2019. Now, what else are we going to do here? So looking at humpback dolphins all across the Northern Territory. I mean, before this, it was flying foxes, so you've got a very broad skill set. And so today she's going to be talking about, you can read, so I won't read the title out. So an update on an ARC funded project that's underway. And we've got a bit of a real all-stars event here because we're going to get some other people pinch hitting into the presentation as we go. So that's more than enough from me. I'll hand over to you. Carol, do you want to click that? So got a clip, doesn't have a clip. Work out what you're going to do with that one. Thank you.
Oh, can I just put it on the ground?
Probably.
Okay. Thanks, Dylan. I'll pay you for those comments. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. And yeah, look, here's to 2022. It's been a pretty, 2021 was weird. And yeah, hopefully 2022 actually moves forward a bit. At the end of 2020, we were lucky enough to get funded through the ARC to do this Marine Megafauna Project. So Sam Banks, Rick Buckworth and myself from CDU, and I'll go through, you'll see it'll probably get a bit boring, which I'm sorry about who we have as a partner organisations. We've got 4 ranger groups plus a whole range of other colleagues. But it's a really important project. A lot of marine work, we're still kind of at the bottom of the pile compared to the rest of Australia. So anyway, there's a couple of videos, just short 1-minute videos, and this just gives you an idea. So we've got this fantastic collaborative partnership which has worked so well in the last 10 months with the Larrakia Ranges. The Gumma Ranges are from the Wessel Archipelago. You'll see a map where that is soon. Kakadu National Park and Coburg Marine Park. So that's the Northern Territory Government, and Kakadu's the Commonwealth. The researchers are, you know, the very, very talented Sam Banks and Rick Buckworth. We've got Macquarie Uni, James Cook, Edith Cowan, which is down in Perth, Taronga Conservation Society, Sea Darwin, which runs an ecotourism sort of vessel operation in Darwin Harbour, and AIMS. And just to not kind of go into too much detail, but these are the 4 main areas that we'll be working. So Kakadu, Coburg, which is number 2. Number 3 is that northeast part of Arnhem Land, and you can see that the Wessel Archipelago is actually a very unusual shape. And number 4 is the Darwin region, but we've actually also extended a little bit further to the west to Fog Bay. And Fog Bay is a really, really important fishing hotspot and is really, really good for a whole lot of marine megafauna. The first, we did a couple of small field trips, but the first real field trip was to Field Island, which is at the mouth of the South Alligator. So this is the South Alligator, that's where you put the boat in, travel down, that's Field Island. and working with the Kakadu rangers, who are extremely talented at doing rodeo for jumping overboard, catching turtles, and then we were putting them up on the boat and putting satellite tags, GPS tags on them, which takes about an hour to glue them on. But it was really the Kakadu rangers that trained us all up in the rodeo. And what's probably really important is that you've got to use the tides, and you're using a neap tide, and you're in the last third of that tide. So it's very, very shallow. It's kind of tricky. You're on a number of boats, and, you know, you could easily hit rocky reefs and things like that. So safety is our number one thing, obviously. Keeping an eye out for crocodiles, obviously. But we're all very, and certainly having all of us with the range of experiences, safety has always been our number one thing. So this is just a quick little video to kind of give you an idea of actually what it looked like. So we had the Larrakia Rangers, the Kakadu Rangers, and CDU, and this was the first time where we satellite tagged in the Northern Territory 3 male green turtles, which were at least 100 years old, and I'll go into some of their movement stuff in a sec. And you can see a full photo, and this is what actually makes it look good. Off the north and west end of Wessel Islands. And so this is what's happened. So we tagged 3 male turtles, the first 3 male turtles, green turtles, to be tagged in the Northern Territory. If not, I think some male turtles, as have been injured, have been tagged. But the rodeo is an amazing thing. And but just to give you an idea, so if you look at the pink dots, that was male number 52. After he was tagged, he left Field Island in 3 days, and then he travelled all the way down to Coburg. And he spent 42 days travelling there. He spent 101 days at foraging and mating at Scott Reef. And then on the 11th, on the 12th of December, he departed, and he arrived back at Field Island on the 11th of January this year. He's travelled 2,800 kilometres. Number male 48, which is the blue one, he left about 2 weeks after being tagged, and he travelled all the way down to West Kimberley. 32 days travelling, 77 days foraging and mating down at West Kimberley. Left on the 27th of the 12th, the 21st of the 11th, 36 days, and they're both back at Field Island. And I suppose it's kind of interesting that they're, 100 years old, they've travelled all those kilometres, they're vegetarian, more or less. So they're extremely good swimmers. And what they're actually using is, during our dry season, they're travelling west. Come the wet season, when the nor'westers kick in, they're travelling back. But I don't think this kind of thing has ever been recorded before that I know of. So certainly Rick Buckworth, who's a fantastic fisheries expert, and Sam and a few of us will actually put hopefully a paper together soon just about this. The third male that we tagged, he was tagged on the 21st of July, but his tag stopped working on the 17th of October, so he didn't do any kind of travel. We've got DNA samples of all of them, and we'd be able to work out where they're from, hopefully. But yeah, this is pretty interesting stuff. We then, for September, October, we spent 3 weeks on the Wessels, and so the Wessels is an amazing area. This is the Wessel Islands here. That's where Darwin is, and that's where that is. And yeah, it's probably the most remotest and difficult place to do any, whether it's land-based or sea-based. The sea-based is a little bit trickier than the land-based stuff, but it is a really tough, well, it's the most amazing area that we need to look after, but it is really tough because, yeah, the weather can be terrible and things like that. So for the 3 weeks that we were there, we collected 12 reef manta ray samples, which I'll go into why we did that. We tagged 2 female turtles, but overall, we had the Kakadu Rangers with us working with the Martha Rangers, and the numbers of turtles certainly appear to be really, really low, but because no one's done any work there ever apart from, I think it was 2005, Macquarie Uni put 4 tags on olive ridleys. And in the 1990s, a couple of the turtle people, Ray Chatto and Cole Limpus, identified a whole range of nesting areas along the whole archipelago, but no one has actually ever done any research there. So it's kind of good to be out there. And from our sightings, so from the cetacean side, we had humpback and snubfin dolphins, false killer whales, and for the first time we came across a group of about 8 live short-fin pilot whales, and that was all off Hopeful Bay, which is where we were camped. And Hopeful Bay is just here, and that's where the false killer whales were, the short-fin pilot whales. So yeah, it's a pretty interesting part. And you can see these are kind of some of the surveys that we did. This is Elko Island here. So that's just kind of a travel, but whenever we're traveling, we're always recording whatever we see. And these are working with the Martha Rangers and traditional owners. So we spent about 3 weeks there, and luckily we also had Andrew Edwards, who is a marine person, but he also did the first fire assessment ever of Marchenbar Island. And we had Mark Grubert from Fisheries, who volunteered his time, and he was fantastic to work with. And we had Sam and these rangers, and yeah, it's an amazing place. It's one of the hotspot areas. So with the mantas, back in 2017, we collected a couple of DNA samples. Queensland University, Chris and her team have been working on the reef manta rays for many, many years. They've all done their PhDs and they've done the research. We sent the 2 samples down that we collected off Marchenbar Island. They did the analysis, and with this PCA plot based just on those 2 samples. So the green individual, that is actually the NT reef manta. This is the Queensland, so from Lady Elliot in North Stradbroke, and this is the WA from Coral Bay in Exmouth. And what it looks like is that the Northern Australian, or certainly the NT population, is distinct from the East Coast and the West Coast. So to get these 12 samples, which are now with Chris and her team at Queensland Uni, we'll get the analysis, and we'll be able to work out, is it a separate population? And again, this will be the first time that it's been done in the NT. This is again Marchenbar Island, and this is where, just on the vessel boat stuff, that's where we caught them. Oh, not caught them. So we used a pole and with someone on the front of the boat, and you just hit them very lightly, and you end up with a very, very small skin sample. And from that, we were being able to extract the DNA. Alison did all that. Oh, sorry, not for this, but for the false killer whales, which I'll go into next, and the turtles. So again, it just highlights at the NT, from a marine perspective, we're kind of, we need to do a lot more work from a marine perspective. And this is just to give you an idea. So this is at Jensen Bay. Jensen Bay was also, during the Second World War, one of the areas where our Defence Force spent a huge amount of time. I won't go into the history there because it's an amazing history, but this just gives you an idea. So there's just the Kakadu Rangers, Dwayne and Puna and me on this boat. It's a Saturday morning, the tide's going out. We're in very, very shallow water, but this just gives you an idea of how to, it doesn't have any music to this, how to rodeo. So Dwayne's driving the boat, Puna's up front, and you'll see the turtle in a second. You can actually see the rocky sort of reef, and you'll see the turtle in a second, and this is what's in there. He is, he's moving. So this is actually really, really tricky. And the green turtles and all the turtles can move fast for a quite short period of time. and then they just get so tired because they're not used to being chased like this. He stops, Puna jumps overboard, he's in water that he can stand in, and what does he do? He's got the green turtle, and this is a female green, so we tag 2 females, and you can see how amazing that is. I can actually walk in the water, but you know, there's, yeah, it's pretty interesting. And the 2 females that we tagged, all the tags stopped working after about 6 weeks for those 2 females. I'm not too sure why that is, but because there's lots of rocky reef, you're gluing the tags onto the top of their shell, and whether they've gone under the rocky thing and it's just been able to shift the actual tag off. Anyway, and this is just, so Mark Grubert, fisheries expert, he just put this together. So this gives you an idea of, again, you know, the boat-based sort of work that we do. Yeah, it's just to give you an idea of how far we travelled in one day looking for species, but we also recorded a huge amount of plastics. But this, Mark just put this together, and it's pretty good. Being on a boat, you'd hate it. And so now we were so lucky to have Andrew come with us, who actually is a fantastic boat and marine person. But there was a really bad fire at the end of 2020. And this was the first time we've had any fire assessment for one of the most hotspot islands in the Northern Territory. Over to Dr. Edwards.
Carol dragooned me into going to Marching Bar, as she has done, to come up here and talk to you today. So just very quickly, I'll go through what's happened. So very long unburnt, the island. So you would have noticed from the earlier maps, Marching Bar is the most sort of northeasterly island of that archipelago. It's about 80 kilometres long, 3 to 5 kilometres wide, sometimes a bit thinner up the top there. Jensen Bay is sort of halfway along, and it's a very popular spot for people to stop. It's a very popular spot for traditional owners too, so they tend to go to that place. There's a bit of a settlement there a long time ago. It got knocked out by the cyclone many years ago, and there's not sort of only very small remnants of any habitation there now. But a lot of sailors stop there, like you know, recreational folk. And in late October of 2020, a fire started there at Jensen Bay, and it took about 4 weeks to move north and south. So you can see in that image there, I've highlighted the fire scars. It's sort of all brown, so you can see quite a substantial portion of the island got burnt. And really the mission for that survey out there was to see how effective, you know, what the effects were on, as far as sort of fire severity goes, for a lot of vegetation. So I went and took lots and lots of photos, took lots of samples of plants and that kind of thing as well, and measured the fire severity using a drone to get extra transects as well. So, and in actual fact, a lot of that country, and you might have been able to see from the earlier images, but if you look at this image on the left, You can see it's very, very dissected sandstone. And so most of the, I've got some pickies of countryside. So that image in the bottom left, that's a gap. Sorry, the middle bottom one. It's a gap between sandstone, and a lot of it is like that. So this was an unburnt area at the very southern end of the island that was not affected by the fire. And then this was a bit of a peninsula that it somehow escaped getting burnt as well. You can see the fuel loads are enormous. So it would have been like that everywhere. A lot of that rocky country didn't get affected by fire. So it is a very, very patchy fire, but where it has burnt, it's like, you know, wiped a lot of stuff out. So a lot of wildlife on the island. We saw a lot of wallabies, little rock wallabies, quolls, tons and tons of quolls, and you've got golden-shouldered bandicoots there as well. I'll stick with the plants. So anyway, there's lots of fruit on the island as well. Tons of plants with fruit that we discovered at that time. Or, you know, I went and sampled at the time in October, September, October. So you can imagine it's pretty fertile throughout the whole year, and there's plenty of these down here in the bottom left. That's a picture of these. There's lots of these sort of continuous areas of sand dunes with patches of jungle on them, plenty of fruiting plants in amongst there. These terminalias up here in the right, they're really extensive, tons of fruit on them all the time, and plenty of other plants with fruit on them, as well as all these sort of shrubby heathlands as well, tons and tons of that stuff. So quite rare veg in lots of ways, lots of stuff hidden up there. There's a very extensive survey done in 2011 by Banowski and Jeremy Russell Smith and his wife.
Oh, no, that was 1990 or something.
Oh, God, okay. Yeah, lots of data. So big lists of plants available for the area, and lots of these little creeks you see here with the water. So there's stacks of water all over the island. The wallabies, as I said, were very persistent. There was a lot of scats, lots of obvious, you know, signs of life on there. So it's a pretty amazing and unique place, and probably mostly because of quolls, it's very much worth us getting involved in managing it there. And you don't have something to say about that. I'll let you go.
And also just to say that there's no, certainly on Marchenbar Island, there's no cats, there's no rats, there's no introduced plant species. And I'd just like to say that with Teigan and Brett, they help supply us with 12 camera traps. So we, for the first time ever, again on Marchenbar Island, put out the camera traps, and thank you to Teigan then for that, because it was really great. It's the first time the rangers have done that kind of work, but we also, with Sam and myself and the rangers, we did the tracking of mammals, and I'll hand over to the mammal expert.
So as Carol has touched on, it's a really special place, Marchenbar. And one of those reasons is the golden bandicoot. And in Carol's long career history, it didn't actually touch on the fact that she was part of a team that confirmed the presence of this species on Marchenbar in the early 1990s. So the species is extinct from mainland Northern Territory. The only place the golden bandicoot occurs in Australia now is in a small area of the Kimberley. So to have this species still here in the NT is really important. And so we do need to make some targeted efforts to be monitoring this population to make sure that it's still doing well throughout time, given the pretty bad history of small mammal declines that we have here in Northern Australia. So when Carol had the opportunity to put some of these cameras out with
Sam and the rangers.
With the rangers and Sam, we were really hoping to detect some golden bandicoots, but unfortunately we didn't. But there's still plenty of time. We'll try again, no doubt, before the project is over. But what we did get lots of was the quolls and wallabies, the rock wallabies. Obviously, they were very attracted to the base because we had lots and lots of detections of these species. We do know a little bit about the quolls on Marchenbar Island. And one thing that we do know is really quite interesting. They have the least genetic diversity all northern core populations in Australia. So this is a really interesting population because when we talk about genetic diversity, we talk about the ability to adapt to changes. So given that this population has such low genetic diversity, in the face of a changing climate and just the future changes that are likely to happen, it'll be really interesting to monitor this population to see how it copes with those changes. And then the rock wallabies. There's been some really interesting work done across Northern Australia with rock wallabies that's identified quite a few new species that through the use of genetics and morphology. So there's more species of rock wallaby than we initially thought there were in the Kimberley and Northern Territory. There were some samples from Manta Island, 2 samples from Manta Island included in those taxonomy studies, but they were collected from museum samples that were collected from the island in 1942. So they're very old samples, so it would be really interesting to get back there and get some more genetic samples from the wallabies on March and Bar so that we can look at how that genetic diversity has changed since 1942, but also to explore, to better explore how the species fits in with the other species across Northern Territory and the Kimberleys. So I think it's a really, Carol sort of touched on how hard it is to work in these remote areas. So by sort of involving different researchers from different areas and trying to come at all aspects of these areas, we can really, we're really well placed to conserve and to work together collaboratively to find out as much as we can.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that that's what's been so great about this project, or certainly for March and Bar, was to be able to have fire, land mammal colleagues, and we could work together over this along with the rangers. And it's the first time the rangers had the chance to kind of do this work. So that's what's fantastic. Yes, it was a Marine Megafauna Project, but we were able to extend what we were doing to cover off a whole range of things, because we might as well try and do as much as we can when we're in these remote locations, because it is so expensive, time consuming to be out there. We might as well try and kill 2 birds with 1 stone or whatever. So thanks, you two. So next is, doing the boat trips, and this is what we recorded. So I would say, having worked on the Wessel Archipelago since the mid-90s, we now have the worst plastics nets and ghost nets across the Northern Territory, both on the east and the west coast. None of it's being collected because no one's had any money to do it. And now it is a really, really big deal, and we need to sort it out, certainly do a big clean, and then work out how to manage all of this. A lot of it has come from Asia. So again, the western side of the Wessels gets the northwest flow in the wet season, and the east coast in the dry season gets the southeast. So it gets it. And I've never seen anywhere across the NT like this ever. So we do have, and Troy wrote a fantastic media release about this work, and hopefully we can help sort it out. Then we did Coburg. This is working with the NT Government Coburg Rangers, Robbie and Dylan, who were fantastic, and we had 2 Larrakia Rangers come up with us, even though we did do June, July, but this is the November sort of survey. So we tagged again by Rodeo, the male and female green turtles. We got a couple of DNA samples. We did ghost nets. You'll see some of this. The female olive ridley looked like she'd been caught in the ghost net for at least a month. We were able to release her alive. We got DNA samples from false killer whales, bottlenose and snubfin dolphins using a pole, a crossbow, or the modified 22, which is a New Zealand-based firearm that they developed for taking dolphin and whale samples. Our sightings, the Brutus whale, which is a tropical baleen whale, and I think if we can get DNA samples, we'll find that they're actually an endemic species. They've just found that in the Gulf of Mexico. It used to be called the Brutus whale. They ended up getting the DNA samples and a skull. and it's now called the rice whale, and it's an endemic species. And so hopefully we can do that. And we had sightings of humpback and snubfin dolphins. So they're our endemic coastal species dolphin, and the false killer whales, which is actually a dolphin. And these are out the surveys that we did over a period of time. Yeah. And, you know, again, Coburg is an extremely important place, and Robbie and Dylan are fantastic rangers. And again, they've actually got quite a lot of plastics there too, which they get. And this just gives you an idea of what it was like there. So November, we've got the start of the storms. We saw this left floating and then realised there was another drizzle in it. So we pulled it on board the boat. It had been raining for about 3 or 4 hours and the second day came through. And hopefully she made it. That's the ranges, both the Coburg and the Larrakia ranges. That's one of the traditional owners. This gives you an idea of how big the birds are. So this guy, first male carriage in Coburg, he's probably about 120 years old. This is the largest bird I've ever seen. It's female, probably about maybe 160 years old. So again, it's a really important area, and this just gives you, so very different to the field island male turtles and also the female. So this is just where they've been foraging. The tag is still working, and that's where the female's been foraging. So again, we have the DNA samples, and we'll be able to work out where they're, hopefully where they're from. Because since the 80s and 90s, DNA samples have been collected by turtles all over, you know, Australia, and hopefully we can sort that out. Now, what's interesting is, so the false killer whale is actually a dolphin, and in Hawaii, they've got 2 coastal populations based on the haplotypes. Both those populations are classified as endangered under the US legislation. We collected some samples in 2014. Noah and Karen Martin, who's the expert, she's been doing the analysis for free for us because they're really concerned about these coastal populations of false killer whales. And at the moment, the analysis is getting done, and Alison has taken out the DNA samples. Thank you. And that's about to get sent for analysis, and then it will get sent to NOAA for free, and Karen and her crew will do the analysis. But what it is that we've got samples from the Kimberley, from the WA government, samples from Coburg. The Coburg Rangers using a pole and a crossbow got 7 samples. We've also had a couple of stranded animals. And what Karen has found out from NOAA at the moment is that it's a brand new haplotype, and she's called 45. It's never been recorded before. The analysis is still being finalised, but there is only the one haplotype, and it looks like the Coburg and the Kimberley are all the same population. So once we get the analysis, we'll do a review and certainly review the conservation status, because at the moment they're classified as least concern, and yet the populations will be similar, in my view, to Hawaii, that we're talking about 150 to 200 animals, and they live till they're 90. They eat 150 kilos of fish a day. Gestation period for a female, 16 months. And yeah, they're very important species that we need to look after, like we've looked after the Australian snubfin and the Australian humpback dolphin, which we were able to prove were endemic. And then The last sort of field trip was just a one-day, and this was with Sea Darwin, who does a lot of work with turtles. And we travelled to Fog Bay. This was just to record, marine megafauna. But when we got to this corner down here, there was this seabird sitting on this turtle. We went close and seabird took off, but the turtle couldn't dive. So we went around it a number of times, but he couldn't dive. So we ended up jumping overboard, pulling him up. This is with the Larrakia Rangers, and David Hancock took some fantastic photos. The Larrakia Rangers met us at Cullen Bay, and ArcVet is still looking after what they're calling old man turtle, because he's a flatback. He's probably 120 years. He's had something stuck inside him. They've been working. He's doing fine. And I think sometime in February, again with Sea Darwin, we'll go back down and release him where we were, where we caught him. And these are some of the dolphins that we recorded. So that top one is what's called a dwarf spinner dolphin. That's the smallest dolphin in Australia. He's even shorter than me. And the two bottom ones are just the bottlenose, coastal bottlenose dolphins. And from all the pictures that we've taken over the years, you can see that they definitely have a hard time with some fishing gear and other bits and pieces, and getting struck by boats and things like that, as do turtles. So we've got a bit to kind of sort out. So what's next? Hopefully we'll get a couple of manuscripts out by June 2022, the false killer whale, the Manta Ray analysis, and potentially the male green turtles from Field Island, because that is very, very unique as far as I'm aware. The vet training is something that, because we've done the ranger exchange, and the ranger groups who are partners within this project are so keen to keep doing the exchange, and all have very different skills. And so what we'd like to do is bring some of the more remote rangers here to be able to work with the Larrakia Rangers and the Kakadu Rangers to help step through some of the ways to collect data, because it's really tricky collecting data on a boat, and the data repository, how we manage that, and the potential apps and things like that. Like, we can always be writing on a data sheet, which I'm actually 100% happy with, but apps are certainly being used more and more by everyone. And also documenting traditional science and Western science. That's one of the base parts of this project. In 2021, we would have normally, if there had not been any COVID, we would have had our partners and our colleagues come. So Jo Day from Taronga, who did her PhD on bottlenose dolphins down in New South Wales. Rob Harcourt is a whale and dolphin expert, done a lot of work in Antarctica. He was actually flagged to do a talk here, but again, he couldn't come up. Chandra is, she did her master's up here, no, PhD on mangroves, but she's back in Perth, but she's a fantastic dolphin and whale person. And Holly Rodeo and Kelly Walpers from WA Gov are fantastic dolphin and whale people. So hopefully with COVID that we can bring these people back up here to help. So the rangers can see just the way other people have been collecting information, but the ranger exchange is probably what, certainly from the rangers' perspective, just been the most fantastic thing. And what else? We've got a PhD student starting, which Sam's organised, try and work out all the past DNA samples of all the green turtles across Australia, so we can see where our populations are from, because the male turtles we really don't know much about. And the percentage of male to females is 30% male to 70% female. Now, with climate change, as things start to heat up, there's going to be more and more female, less and less male. So we've actually got to start to think about, do we need to manage that? And with sea level rise, all the nesting beaches can get washed out, which has just happened down the east coast of Queensland right now at a particular site. Potentially through Macquarie Uni, some Olive Ridley tagging to look at oceanography. We've got more tags coming, so each year we'll try and put more tags and all that on the turtles. And overall, the ongoing issues, apart from all the basic work that we do, is the plastics, the ghost nets, sea level rise and climate change. And we'll be doing field trips in Kakadu, Coburg, the Wessel Archipelago and Darwin region and Fog Bay, again, with the ranger exchange and doing both the turtles, the dolphins, the mantas, land mammals, fire. So that's it. So thank you very much.
So yeah, so a big thanks to our sort of dream team. So Dr. Carol Palmer, Dr. Teigan Cremona, and Dr. Andrew Edwards. So what we'll try and do now, I'll try and manage this as best as I can, is we'll do questions from in the room. If you're in your office, perhaps start typing out questions now. I'm not sure if your microphones are allowed to work or not, but so we'll check on the microphone, we'll check on the chat to see if you've got any questions there. But then also, apology, I was going to mention, this is probably Troy's handiwork as well. If you Google Carol Palmer ABC News, you'll see that some of the plastics pollution turned up in an article a week or two ago.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, so it's obviously very scientifically interesting, but then it's obviously got big impact as well. So was that a stretch or a question? Stretch. All right. So do we have any questions from the floor, Robin?
Carol, you showed that graph of the population clustering of the Manta Rays, which is, like you say, Queensland, West Australia, Northern Territory. Do Manta Rays not move that far, or do they come back to breed in the same spot?
Well, certainly, I mean, depending on Queensland need, and if we can attract some funding to get some satellite tags, because the people both in Western Australia and Queensland have put satellite tags, and you can just use a pole to put the sat tags on them, and they get that movement data. We're sort of assuming that it is the reef manta that we're talking about. They were pretty big, hey Andrew? The Manta Rays were huge. And you do actually get an offshore manta. So yeah, we need to clarify that. And actually, if we can get some satellite tags on them, because you get them in Frog Bay, people have reported them in Darwin, Darwin Harbour, off, East Arm, and not East Arm, East Point and all that. So that would be another good way, along with the DNA analysis, to just help clarify, how far do they travel, and again, potentially highlighting the foraging hotspot areas, because then we can help sort out how to manage those areas. Because we're trying to get population estimates of all these things, or certainly the dolphins in particular, is really, really tricky. And to see if there's a decrease or increase or whatever in the populations over time. So that's where certainly, I think, from a much more practical perspective, if we can identify the foraging hotspots for all these marine megafauna and habitats and things like that, let's manage that and then take it the next step at the ranger level to get the more specific information. But as a first call, that will be sort of part of this project. And hopefully with the mantas, because they're really interesting animals. But what can happen also down south, or the east and the west, is that because the water's clearer, people are actually getting photo ID. They're able to get a photo ID of a manta ray's stomach, which is individual. So we use dorsal fins on dolphins and whales because that's the same thing. But we don't have that clarity of clear water that we can do that. So yeah, so again, we're a little bit more trickier from that marine perspective, but they're really interesting fish, even though I'm surprised they're a fish, to be honest.
Anybody else?
Do you have any sense, Carol, of why catching golden bandicoots on camera? Was it just?
Well, I think we probably didn't have the cameras in quite the right spot. And it was really a little bit of a training exercise for the rangers to see. So this is how the camera traps actually work. And to help step them through that, knowing that that had never been done before. This was a whole new world for them. And also over the years where we've done all the bandicoot work there, we've never actually put them down in Hopeful Bay, and that's where we were camped. But having said that, we'll next time we go back, hopefully, if we're based at Jensen Bay, that was one of the real hotspot areas for the bandicoots. And we released them on 2 other islands, so it will be good to go back, because we haven't actually done any population analysis since when 2011 was when they were released. We went back in 2016, and yes, they were on the 3 islands. We'd released them, but it was very basic beta. But, you know, it's great that there's no cats, there's no rats, introduced rats and things like that. So that's actually what makes it really a fantastic place. And the bird species, the seabirds, you know, it really is an amazing area.
Well, I'll jump in. And sorry, for the people playing at home, we're not passing the microphone around. We should have said I'll repeat the question. But obviously, there's a huge fieldwork component for the project. How impacted by COVID?
Well, we've been pretty good. Certainly all of us here, we've all been vaccinated, including the rangers, including everyone that we're working with. And our colleagues that could have come from the other universities and things like that, they really wanted to come to be part of it, but they would have either been in lockdown here for 2 weeks and then lockdown back to their place for 2 weeks, and they just obviously couldn't afford the time or the expense of that. But no, we would not travel anywhere without being vaccinated, without having been vaccinated, and now we've all got boosters too. So, but you know, certainly at the moment with what's happening, there is that spread of the Omicron. So we, yeah, hopefully over the next couple of months we can sort, you know, this will be, it gets better. Yeah.
Can you rodeo at turtle if you can't stand up anymore?
Yeah, it's just that depending on, like, you can see how big some of those turtles are, and if you can stand, you actually can really hold on to the turtle. But if you've got to swim with him or her, and you know, like, they can just take off, and that happened a couple of times. But that's what's so good about having the experience of, in particular, the Kakadu rangers who've done this for a long time, to really work the tides. And so everything actually, what we do is based on tides. And yeah, to be able to stand on the ground, but also be really careful that you're not on rocky reefs and things like that. And there's always people, colleagues, keeping an eye out on everything. Yeah. That's it.
Yeah, looks like it. So we're quiet people in their office. So, so if we just give our presenters just one more round of applause.
Thank you.
All right.